Hello, everybody. This is the BP Learned Hand, and this is part 3 of our 3-part series on defamation. We are going to cover the 3 multiple choice questions that we have in part 3. So let's start with number 1. Hopefully you have the materials. If you don't have the materials, please go to babybar.online and they will be available for you in the post. So let's go straight to the question. Which of the following additional facts or inferences, if it were the only one true, would be most helpful to the minister in opposing the motion to dismiss? So we know that the minister, the newspaper moved to dismiss the minister's defamation action. So the minister's bringing a defamation action. We know that you have to have a defamatory statement of and concerning the plaintiff communicated, which causes damages, right? We know that from our first and second series. Now we have this multiple choice. And remember, when you're doing multiple choice, you want to turn your essay brain off. You want to think about what your elements are, and then you want to look at your fact pattern. So a local newspaper printed an article. So we've got a publication to a third party referring to the minister's speech as full of hellfire and brimstone, considering the minister suffers from leprosy. Okay, do we have a defamatory statement? Well, this part right here, considering the minister suffers from leprosy, all right, so that is definitely going to be defamatory, but it's a special kind of defamatory. Because remember, we have our libels, right? We know that when somebody says something as horrible as leprosy, you know, that's a loathsome disease. So after seeing the article, the minister sued the newspaper. All right, so let's look at our options here. We have A, B, C, and D. A, the minister was so upset upon reading the newspaper statement about him that he had a heart attack. Okay, well, that sounds like an element of a tort, but remember, we're looking for defamation. So we're looking for a defamatory statement communicated, you know, to a third person causes damages. Editors of the newspaper dislike the minister. C, leprosy is a loathsome disease. Or D, the minister is neither public official nor a public figure. Now, remember, the plaintiff in a defamation case has to prove special damages to his or her reputation that occurred because of the statement. However, if the defendant accuses the plaintiff of having a loathsome disease, remember, they're not required to show damages. And leprosy, venereal diseases, AIDS, all that stuff, those are loathsome diseases. So that kind of falls into one of those almost per se type things. So here our answer is C, clearly because leprosy is a loathsome disease. Now, we're going to move on to number 2. So if you haven't read the questions yet, I would recommend you pause and go through the question and make a decision, and we'll get there next. All right, so we're on to number 2. Hopefully you've already read the fact pattern, so let's go straight to the call of the question. If Adam commences an action for defamation against Steve, which of the following would be Steve's most effective argument in defense? Now, remember, we know that we need a defamatory statement of and concerning the plaintiff communicated to a third party that causes damages. So let's take a look. A, Adam is a public figure. B, the statements made by Steve were expressions of opinion. C, Steve's occupation makes him a media defendant. And D, Steve's statements were privileged by the defense of competition. Now remember, this is where having confidence in yourself and going into that FYLSC is going to make the difference, because you are going to immediately in your head say, a media defendant? I don't think I've ever really heard of a media defendant, and you haven't. So that means C is wrong. And then D says Steve's statements were privileged by the defense of competition. Well, if you're beginning to think to yourself, well, I've never heard of the defensive competition, then you're right, and you need to have confidence in that, because we haven't covered defensive competition, and I don't know if that is a defense. So D is wrong. So that leaves us with A and B. Adam is a public figure. Well, we do know that sometimes whether you're a public figure or a public official is going to come into play, right? But clearly here in this fact pattern, what we have is we have an expression of an opinion. And when you're looking at expressions of opinion, it's important to remember that if a reasonable person would believe these to be facts, then we could be looking at a defamation action. But clearly here in this situation, we have these 2 sports writers who are just, you know, beating each other up in the newspaper because it's funny for them. And a reasonable person would more likely than not see this as being a true statement or being a fact. So clearly this is a statement of opinion, and so our answer is B. Now, once again, if you haven't gone to number 3, this is when you're going to want to pause. All right, so number 3, straight to the call. In his lawsuit, the minister must prove that the newspaper, so we know once again we're in defamation, and once again we're going to have the same repetitive conversation in our head. I'm looking for a defamatory statement of and concerning the plaintiff published to a third party that causes damages, right? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at this. So let's start with our questions, A, B, C, and D. Let's start with B. So B describes actual malice, but it's incorrect because a plaintiff who is not a public person is not required to prove actual malice. And that's what B is talking about. Entertained serious doubts about whether or not the minister was affiliated with the gate. We know that in a defamatory action by a private person against a professional publisher, the plaintiff must prove either actual malice or negligence. That's that New York malice. If the newspaper knew the statement to be false, it has actual malice. Remember that New York malice. If the reasonable publisher would have known the statement to be false or didn't do its due diligence to see if it was false, then they acted negligently, right? So B is talking about that actual malice, and it's incorrect because a plaintiff who's not a public person is not required to show actual malice. Now, C is incorrect because no liability can be imposed unless the newspaper knew or reasonably should have known that the statement, that they're making here was false. So, knew the gate were associated with shame or disgrace in the mind of some of the readers. So, no liability can be imposed unless the newspaper knew, right? Unless they knew. And then let's take a look at D. So D says made the statement, but the minister's not required to prove fault since the minister's not a public person. Well, remember, liability without fault can be imposed in an action against a professional publisher, and that's what they are here. And then what we have in A says knew, or that the reasonable publisher would have known that the minister was not affiliated with the gate. So that goes back to, if the newspaper knew the statement was false, it had actual malice. If the reasonable publisher would have known the statement to be false, then they acted negligently. So our answer is A, knew, or the reasonable publisher would have known. So I hope this helps with you and your multiple choice questions. Remember, when you're going through these, you have to answer them very robotically. You have to turn your essay brain off, and you have to put those elements of the theory in your head. You go to the call, you identify your theory, and then you put those elements in your head. And when you walk through that fact pattern, you look for those specific things. You look for your defamatory statement, check. Of and concerning the plaintiff, check. Communicated to a third party, check. Causes damages, check. Okay, what am I looking at? Is this a constitutional issue? Check. Am I with a public figure or a public official? Check. Do I need New York malice? Check. Do I have different damages? And that's what you need to be thinking as you go through your multiple choice questions. Very, very robotically. So that's it for today, and that's it for our 3-part on defamation. Don't forget to like us, subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow.